Thank you so much for joining our event on how to navigate AMCAS and personal statement. My name is Yan. I'm the Vice President of MedX International, and we are a pre-med student organization at UCLA. And today I will be the host and moderator of this event. So here is our agenda. So first we'll have our panelist introduction, and then we will go over the AMCAS section by section with 2 Q&A sessions, particularly focusing on the work and activities and also the personal statement section of the AMCAS. And throughout this presentation, feel free to type in any questions about AMCAS into the chat, and we'll try our best to have your question addressed promptly. And lastly, we'll have a live Q&A session. So during this section, you can unmute yourself, use the raise hand function, or type your question in the chat to ask anything you would like to know more about the application process. Okay, now let's welcome our two amazing panelists, Kalina and Ziad. So unfortunately, the other panelist, Jo, she's not able to join us today because of some change in her schedule. But Kalina and Ziad, would you like to introduce yourself? And here are some questions you may include in your introduction.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Kalina. I just graduated from Emory University. I was a major in economics, and I did a lot of health classes together with it. So I had a concentration in health. I don't know the medical school that I'm attending yet, but I'm in between Emory and Vanderbilt. I'm just waiting for some more info. And I'm originally from Brazil. I'm in Brazil right now. And one meaningful activity I would say it's probably a program that I started at an autism center at Emory for kids with autism to socialize more.
I guess I'll go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Ziad. I am from Beirut, Lebanon. That's where I spent most of my life until the age of 18. And then I moved to New York City, and I'm currently a senior at Columbia, studying biomedical engineering. And I committed last week to Harvard Medical School, which is where I'll be spending the next 4 years of my life. One most meaningful activity I did during undergrad. So I really love learning languages, and I've been a medical interpreter for about 3 years now. And one of the interpreting types that I've done was working with the Columbia Law School Immigrant Rights Clinic, where I worked as a medical interpreter for political refugees that were also torture survivors in New York City and that were applying for asylum. So I worked on physical and psychiatric evaluations with them, which was really rewarding.
Thank you so much for the great introduction. And so here are some important dates for this upcoming application cycle. So the AMCAS application will open on May 3rd this year. And that's when we can start to access the whole application and fill in the information. And on May 27th, we can start to submit the application. And on June 25th, that's the first day that the AMCAS system will start to send your verified application to medical schools for their review. And for some more information on dates and deadlines, you can check out this link for the AMC pre-med calendar. Okay, so now we can get into the AMCAS application. So for the first 3 sections, it's mainly about the background information of the applicants. So this part should be fairly straightforward. One thing to note is for section 2, the schools attended, you need to include the high school you graduate from and also every post-secondary institution and universities where at least one course was taken there. Yeah, that's pretty much for this part. Is there anything that Ziad and Kalina you would like to add on for this first 3 sections?
Honestly, I think that first part is like really straightforward. It's just like demographic information and background information. So it should be fairly easy to complete.
Cool. All right, so we can move on to section 4. It's about the coursework. So in this part, you need to submit a transcript for every post-secondary institution you have attend, and you have to include all the classes you enrolled, including those like withdrawn or repeated. And here is the course information that we need to fill in this part. And particularly for course classification, there's a full list on this webpage at AMC's website. And for lastly, for the GPAs, based on the grades, the AMCAS system will calculate 3 types of GPAs. So the first one is BCPM GPA, which is mainly about science. For science classes, and for all the other classes, it'll be counted towards the AO GPA, and of course there's one total GPA in the end. So for this section, our panelists, Kalina and Ziad, anything that we need to pay attention to for this part?
Not really. You do have to plug in each of the classes separately and say which type of class it is. So chemistry, biology, and there's a big list. So sometimes if you took, like I took IDS courses, and I could put them as either like biology or like psychology. So you can kind of choose. And there's a file on the MCAS website that helps you with that. It's really useful.
Cool, thank you for the input. And Ziad, anything to add on?
Um, I think, yeah, that classification is also like there are guidelines, but at the end of the day, it's really what you make out of it because you were the one taking the class and you can sort of like know whether it falls into one of the categories. Um, so yeah, for example, I had a lot of engineering classes and like I put some of them like quantitative physiology, for example, which is very bio heavy. I was able to put that in the bio section. So it's a bit flexible in that sense. Also, one other thing is so AMCAS calculates the GPA out of a 4.0 scale. I don't know if UCLA or other school uses another scale. I know at Columbia our scale is 4.3. So if your school scale is different, it will be scaled to the AMCAS 4.0 scale.
Okay, thank you so much. And we get one question from the chat. So it's asked for applicants that have a Bachelor of Science in Evolutionary Biology, would that count as BCPM GPA, even if it's anthropology? And their university recognized human evolutionary bio as a science degree. So that's this question asking. So basically it's asking, will the evolutionary biology count as BCPM GPA, even if the topic is more towards the anthropology side?
Honestly, for classes like that, which was on the line, I would, if I got an A, then I would put it as biology because it would just raise your GPA. If you didn't do as well, then go ahead and put whatever else you want to put. Just works.
Cool.
Totally agree. Just one thing is like just make sure that there is biology in the class so that like if they were to like Google the class or like look at the syllabus that they do check that like it does fall into that category. But yeah, I think if you when it's like when there is a gray area, I think look at the grade and like see if you want to put it in as a science or not.
Okay, cool. And there's another question asking about psychology class.
I think psych has a particular, so psych is in one of the categories that it's very clear that it's in one of the things. So it's yeah, psych like would be, I don't think it's counted as BCM. I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
Unless it was a psych class that was very, very bio heavy, like neuropsychology or something that's very neuro heavy, then maybe that could count as a bio. But I think
see.
psych would be in another category.
I see. Yeah, so basically for BCPM is just for biology, chemistry, physics, and math, right? Okay.
So if it's
That
like
makes
intro
sense.
to psych, I don't think that can be counted as BCPM.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much. And for section 5, work and activities. So in this part, you can put in a maximum of 15 experiences And you can choose, you can kind of categorize them into 18 categories, which include, for example, clinical, non-clinical volunteer, extracurricular activities, hobbies, publications, etc. And for each of the 15 experience, you have a maximum of 700 characters to describe this activity. And there's some other information needed as listed here. And one thing is you need to provide the contact information of the person who can verify your involvement in this activity. And among the 15 experiences, you can select up to 3 most meaningful experiences. And for this 3, you get an additional 1,325 characters to explain why it's most meaningful to you. And regarding this section, we got some questions from the RSVP forums. So sorry. Oops. Okay, so our first question asks, can I talk about the same experience in multiple sections of the application? And there's a related question asking how to avoid repeating myself in, say, activities description, personal statement, and disadvantaged essay sections. Any input on that?
Go ahead, Ziad. I saw you nodding.
Yeah, I can talk about that one because that's definitely like something that I struggled with. Like, because I mean, we do like often have activities that are very similar, and like there are some like there are three most meaningful activities, and like there probably is an overlap between these three most meaningful activities and the personal statement, because if they were so meaningful, then like it's possible that you're going to talk about something related to it in the personal statement. And I think overlap is okay. If there's no overlap at all, then it's a bit like it's it's yeah, it's I think it's normal to have overlap. But one advice that I have is when you think about a particular experience, there's never one point of view or one angle that you can look at it. Like you can have one experience, but like if you look at it from different perspectives, or like different lessons that you've learned, or like different times of that experience, different stories of that experience, like there always is a different way to look at the same experience that can make it not a repetition, but like can even like build upon your story and make it even more, I think, convincing.
Yeah, one tip that I have for that is, of course, you're going to repeat the experiences, because if it's important enough to be in your personal statement, it has to be in your activity section. And what I did was, for example, if you've been doing an activity for a long time and you started off as, I don't know, just like a volunteer, but then you grew to become the leader. Then for one of the sections, like in my personal statement, I would talk about my time just starting. But then in the activity session, I would talk about me as a leader. So I would like point out different abilities that I have, I would say, or just different stories. Like tell about a different day. If you've been doing it for a year, you probably have so many stories to tell that just don't repeat the same story. But definitely, you will be talking about the same experience more than once. Actually, probably more than twice, because it's just the same thing over and over. Interview day is the same thing over and over. So
And
just
then
have that.
come secondaries, like you're gonna
Yeah,
have to
like
talk about
yeah,
it again, like you can't come up like it's the same experiences. It's just a matter of like thinking about them differently. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really insightful. And our next question asks for some advice on writing the activity descriptions part. So I think that that'll be like a 300 characters, or like plus the additional ones to explain the most meaningful experience. So is there any tips or advice on how to write that part?
For that part, you have a really small space, and so I tried not to waste time telling them what I had already plugged in. So you plug in like, I think, hours, like where you were working, something like that. So I would kind of like skip that all in one sentence so that I wouldn't waste all those characters. And then I would go ahead and say like, I don't know, like how I improved from it, or one thing that I worked on. So I would still try to like put in more of like, oh, I'm this good, not don't make it just a description. Like try to tell them I'm good because I did this, like I did this and that, like I achieved this, I rose from being nothing to being president. You're always trying to impress them. So try to use that space for that. Don't waste your space just saying like I worked 1,000 hours plugging in numbers doing research. Like no, they don't want to know that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Ziad, anything to add on this question?
I agree with what Karina said. I like adopted. I think there are many strategies to tackle this part. Like it's definitely not like a one strategy that like is for everyone. I did a 3-step strategy where like the first part I like described what my role is. Again, not repeating anything that is in the title above, because I think like some activities like can be confusing, and it's important that they understand what you did. So like very precisely describe your role and your duties. I think that's important for them to know what the activity is. The second one is development. If there's any development that happened, for example, like you started at a club and then you became vice president, or like you started like volunteering in like a particular department and then they like included you in more departments. If any development that happened, like include that. Then the third part is for every activity, I had like a sentence or two about what I learned. So either what I learned or if there's any like major event like publication or something, that's what came out of that, or like a major like something that a major achievement, I would put that in the third category, or just like what you learned. Like I think that's important to hear.
Thank
That's
you
really
so
helpful.
much. Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
you're editing, make sure you put in the three. You can start doing it by putting in the three questions. That's what I did. I would like highlight them and be like, answer this, answer that, and then just like put them into one thing. That's the most helpful thing because you're going to be writing 15 of those. So you want to make sure they answer all the questions.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Uh, our next question is how to categorize an activity that seems to fit into multiple categories. So, for example, if a student is in a leadership position at a student club, would that count as extracurricular or leadership or like anything else like that might fit in?
Yeah, that one is tricky. I again, just like the classes thing, it's not, there's no like right or wrong answer for that. It's really like, because at the end of the day, you were the one doing that activity, so you probably know best whether like it was really leadership or if it was more an extracurricular activity. And like I don't think it really matters at the end of the day what the title is. But just make sure that like, if it's a leadership position, you might be asked why it was an important leadership position at an interview, or like they might ask you like a particular question given the category that you chose. So just make sure that the category is something that you feel comfortable talking about and discussing if that's what they ask you on an interview. And then at the end, because I don't think that it like makes a huge difference whether you choose one or the other.
I see. Kalina, anything to add on?
No, I agree with that. You can also, you're the one who picks the title of the activity. So you can just put what leadership position you had in the title and put it as an extracurricular. They'll
Okay,
know what it is. Yeah.
I see. Cool. And our last question is, did you do any virtual shadowing during the COVID pandemic? And if so, did you write about it on your application?
I
Go
didn't.
ahead.
What I did was I was also a translator for like a free clinic in Atlanta, and when COVID started, I was doing it. It wasn't like shadowing. It wasn't virtual, but it was, well, it was all virtual. So it was all through the phone, but it was no like shadowing. It was me translating, and but I did it when I had already sent in my primaries, so I didn't really add that to my. I feel like for both me and Zayed, like COVID started in April, so there wasn't really much that we could plug in to the
Yeah,
primaries.
Yeah,
I
same
see.
here. I mean, and it's actually funny because like the only virtual part that I had is also my phone interpreting, like the medical interpreting when everything went virtual. I also started doing that on the phone, and I had like a
Yeah.
sentence about that in my primary. But yeah, I think like Kalina and I are part of the cycle that like experienced COVID during the cycle, so we didn't really like do or like we didn't have to do any virtual shadowing, so I don't really know how
Mhm.
that works in COVID times.
I see. Thank you so much. Okay, so the next section is about the letter of evaluation. So on AMCAS, you can put in up to 10 letter interests, but of course, we don't really need to use all of them. And you may submit your application even if your letters have not yet arrived at AMCAS, because I think AMCAS, they don't need the letters in order to verify your whole application. So we still get a little bit more time on the letters. And there are three types of letters accepted by AMCAS. So the committee letter, letter packet, and individual letters. And in terms of letter submission, the letter writers can submit their letters either through the AMCAS, which is called AMCAS letter writer application, or through a third-party service called Interfolio. So regarding this part, Kalina and Ziad, anything to add on about the letters?
I'm gonna say, please don't send 10 letters. They're not gonna read that. I saw a podcast like before I started applying saying that if you do more than four, like nobody's gonna read your fifth one. And if you have a committee, UCLA probably has one, and they do the committee letter, they'll probably cap it at like four. At least mine did. So I sent four letters, which was inside the committee letter. So just don't do 10. They'll just like say the same thing over and over, you know.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Ziad, anything else?
Yeah, definitely don't send letters. Like I think there's only so much like glowing things that they're gonna read about you, and like it's I think 4 to 6 would be like for me the like perfect spot. I think each school does it differently. So like I personally at Columbia we get a committee letter, and all of the letters of evaluation are sent to our pre-med advising center that then prepares the committee letter. So the letters didn't have to be sent directly to AMCAS. But one thing that I want to know here is that make sure that they're diverse. Make sure that like the the people that you're asking for letters of recommendation are people who know you in different settings. Like some of them are definitely going to be professors, but also make sure that like the classes that the professors teach are somewhat different, that like show some diversity in what you're learning, or like make sure to have a research mentor if you've done some research, or like if you've worked and someone knows you well at a company, like that could be a great letter. Just always think about how like a letter can show a different part of you, and like you want to be able to showcase that diversity in the letters of recommendation, so by asking like different kinds of people.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we got one question from the chat asking, Kalina, can you please explain how did you choose your four letters? I heard about that you have to choose two science, one humanity, one extracurricular, and maybe one committee letter. But UCLA doesn't have a committee letter like this kind of service. Um, yeah, so I guess
Um,
this question is mainly asking like what letters, how did you choose like which one yeah, what letters you are gonna ask.
yeah, so to me, I was an economics major, which is I took very different classes than, the pre-med classes. So I knew that I wanted one of my econ professors to write me a letter because it showed like my statistics side, and it showed that I wasn't all just like bio and chemistry. So I had one econ professor, and I made sure that I had like a good relationship with that professor. I'd always go to office hours. I took more than one course with him, so we built something throughout the years. He knew me very well. And then I had a science professor, which was a chemistry professor, also went to office hours a lot. So I would say like that was my second like professor letter. And then I did research. So I had my research mentor write me a letter. So that was also different from my professors. He had a totally different view of me. And then I had a doctor that I shadowed who was also kind of a mentor to me because he was also an international doctor. So he wrote about me in the shadowing and in the like inside the hospital, which was really cool because he got to talk. Like I read the letter before he even sent it. You're not supposed to do that, but he just showed it to me. And he was talking about how I reacted when I was with him, like with patients and talking to patients. And so yeah, that's how I chose my four letters. I try to make them very different. I wouldn't have asked like two chemistry professors to write it just because it was the same setting. It was basically like
Yeah.
people from the same department. So I try to change departments and then research and shadowing. It's also good to get someone to write like from a volunteering center if you've done it for a long time. Like if something really is meaningful to you and you've been talking about it over and over in your application, it's probably a good idea to have someone write a letter. But yeah, I feel like throughout the 3 years you'll know who to pick. Just keep thinking about it when you choose professors and you feel like you get along. Like go to office hours. I know that I asked my science professor. I asked him to write my letter um, freshman year. So 2 years before, I remember I came to like his office in the end of the semester, and I was like, I have something to ask. In 2 years, can you write me a letter? And then 2 years later, when I just reminded him, I was like, it's time. Then he knew exactly what it was, and so yeah, I was just started thinking about it early, I guess.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you so much. Um, And moving on to the next section for medical school. So here is a section that you will enter all the medical schools you wish to apply to. And in addition to regular MD programs, some medical schools also offer some special programs like combined degree, like MD PhD, MD MBA, and also some schools also have early decision programs. Uh, yeah, that's about this section. And anything to add on about the school list section?
Well, for us internationals, that list is going to be a lot smaller than if you're American. I paid for I think it's an MCAS like lists that you have. They have all the
The
schools in
MSAR,
there, and then
yeah,
yeah, I think it
yeah,
is.
MSAR.
They have like the medium MCAT, whatever. Um, I paid for it, and so I just looked through that. But still, I would email the schools or look at their website because sometimes they change from year to year. I know that Kaiser, it's this new med school like in California. And the first year, like right when they opened, they came to Emory, and I talked to the guy, and he said, yes, we do accept internationals. But then a year later, they weren't accepting. But in the website, it still said that they did. So just make sure that, if you're interested, go in their website or email them just to make sure so that you don't waste your money because you do have to pay a fee for each school that you apply.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Ziad, anything else?
MSAR is great. Like it's the best $28 I've ever spent because it just like gives you just so many information that just does not exist anywhere else, especially for
Yeah.
internationals. You like get statistics about like the previous cycle and also it like gives you an idea of like, like do they interview six internationals and then take no one, or like do they interview 100 and then take 10? So like you get sort of like a benchmark about like which medical schools end up like accepting internationals, um, and that's like very crucial for the school list. I advise between like 20, 25 maximum schools. Like I think that's like the range that I was advised when I was applying. And I think for us internationals, like those 25 schools are pretty much like all the schools that you can apply to that like consistently accept internationals. So like crafting the school list is not the hardest part because we're constrained by which schools we can apply to. Um, Sort of like the like fact of being an international. But like if you're a US citizen, crafting the school list is definitely like a bit harder because you need to like take into consideration location and like which schools you'd like to go to and what kind of medicine you'd like to do. But for us, I think doing the school list is a bit less hard. And one other thing that I had in mind. Oh, one like some schools say they accept internationals and like it might show that like they've accepted one, but like check the nationality because sometimes they only accept Canadian internationals. So there's a difference between Canadian internationals and non-Canadian internationals. A lot of schools do accept Canadians, but don't really accept non-internationals. And if you email them, they will tell you that they accept non-Canadian internationals. But like when you look at the data, they haven't accepted a single one in the past like 3 years. So it's important to like keep track of this because you don't want to like end up spending $600 on like six schools that just have not accepted a non-Canadian international in 3 years and like will not even look at your application. That's just not like fun. So just like make sure that you check that.
Yeah, it's really important. And we also got a question from the chat about the letter of rec. So the question asks, when a professor writes you a letter of rec early, do you need to ask the professor to update the date, which is written on the letter, when you apply to medical school later on?
So with the letter of recommendation, they're gonna send it directly to either your pre-med commission, like pre-med thing in your school, or they're gonna send it directly to your application. So they can't really write it early. Like if they do, they're still gonna have to update it to send it in. It doesn't go through you because they don't want you to read the letter or like open it. So yeah, you probably like missed what I said, but I asked him early, but he only wrote it like the week that it was due, so he didn't write it early. But yeah, I guess they can write it early, but they'll definitely have to check the date because they have to submit it, not you.
I see. And the question also asks, like, if it's submitted through Interfolio, which is kind of like, I'm not sure if any of you are using that. So it's like a third-party service that you can store your letter, even if you ask like way early than the application start. So assuming like if one applicant maybe asked for the letter, like and received the letter like in sophomore year, and then they apply maybe in their senior year, so there's kind of like a 2 years in between, but the letter is already stored at the interfolio. Do you think the applicant should ask the professor to kind of update their letter, or it's okay since it's already stored and it's not on the student's hand? Um, yeah.
Okay. I didn't use Interfolio, but I would say if you have continued like talking to that person, or that person has continued seeing your progress, then yes, I would ask him to update it 100% because that's amazing. But if not, if you haven't even seen that person for that entire time, don't ask him to change because there'll be nothing else to talk about.
I see. And we get another question in the chat. Also someone say to have safety match and reach school when making your school list. Yeah, so that's more about this medical school list section. And with the number of schools that accept international student being limited, is that the way you made your school list? Like have safety match and reach schools?
So I don't that's how I like thought about my school list for college for undergrad as an international student, but like personally that's not how I thought about it for medical school because like all of the acceptance rates are really low and like it's difficult to get into medical school like in any MD or like DO program as an international in the US. So like I don't think that like you need to craft your school list by like safety match and reach and like I think a healthy way of getting into the cycle as an international is being like, well, whatever school I get into is already incredible. It's a huge achievement, and like I'm going to be a doctor, and like that's the I think the way to go as an international because there's just so many like there's a limit of school like there's limited schools that we can apply to. So I don't think you'll have like a hard time making your list. It's sort of like going to be made for you because there's about 20 to 25 schools that consistently accept international. So if you want to apply to less, you can apply to less, but like you can't really like there's not a lot of like choice. I don't know if you've had the same experience, Kadina. Like when I was doing my list, I just like 20 schools. Those are all like the only ones that ended up applying like accepting international. So yeah.
Oh yeah, 100%. There are no safety or like no safety schools in med school. And I would say I did look at like MCAT medium, but honestly, like from the from like interviews that I got or acceptances that I got, that didn't really tell me much because I got interviews from ones that were like above my MCAT, but ones that were like a lot below. But then I didn't get from some that were like right on my MCAT. So I would say just apply to all of them because this is such a like holistic review. They always say that it's ridiculous, but it really is. Like it's not only your MCAT, it's not only your GPA. Sometimes they'll like you just I don't know, maybe they like me just because I'm from Brazil or something like that. So just apply because maybe they're looking for someone that like you that year, and I don't know, it might work for you.
Thank you so much. And I got another question, like about letter of rec. So, It asks the professor, if the professor knows you very well and already wrote a letter of rec, do you still ask them to follow the AMC guidelines? So I guess this question is asking like, so I think there's like a PDF document from the AMC website, like that kind of like address to the letter writer to give some like bullet points about like what you might consider including in the letter. So I think this question is asking if the professor already knows you very well, do you still want them to follow this guideline? Or would you like kind of send that PDF while you request the letter, or just like asked for the letter directly?
So I personally don't really know what the like that PDF is and what the guidelines are. Like what I personally did for letters of rec is the AMC has a list of interpersonal and intrapersonal competencies that they are looking for in medical school applicants, and those competencies are like a list of like qualifications that they believe every single like incoming intern like medical student should have. Like I think it's like empathy and like there's a bunch of like if you Google it, competencies you'll find that, and like that was useful for my interviewers for my letters of recommendation. Sorry, so I like sent that list to my recommenders and was like if there's any experience or like story about me that like showcases one of these, like I think that's a great way to add to the letter of rec. So I think that's how I went about it, but I don't really know about the PDF.
Yeah, I read over the PDF, and I would say that if you're asking professors, most of them already know how to do it. They probably have been doing those letters for so long, especially Chem and Bio. Um, but a lot of my professors, they just ask to meet with me, either office hours or like Zoom meeting, just to talk about like what exactly they should highlight or what did I want them to, emphasize. So yeah, just be open to talking to them or yeah, telling them stories that they can add to the letter.
That makes sense. Thank you so much. So because of the limitation of the time, we have to move on. But if there's any other question about letters or like the sections we've already went over, you can save that question to the end and ask at the live Q&A session. And for next, this is a very important part, the essays section. So there's one essay, the personal comments essay, which is required for all the applicants, no matter which program you apply to. And this essay asks you to write about why you want to go to medical school and become a doctor. And you have a maximum of 5,300 characters, including spaces, to write this essay. And for MD PhD, you will have two additional essays. One is on why you want to choose MD PhD, which has 3,000 characters. And for the significant research experience essay, you have up to 10,000 characters. And this part, you will be able to elaborate more on the specific things you did for your research. And here are some things that you may include in this research experience essay. And here are some questions we selected from the RSVP forums. The first question asks, how do you portray your story as an international student in the personal statement?
Sorry, I was answering someone. So my personal statement was basically about how I was from Brazil and I moved to the U.S. because I felt like that transition told a lot about me, like my story, where I'm from, but also about how I got where I am today because it is very different from my high school experience and from where I was born. So how I portrayed it was I kind of began telling the story of how I started to like medicine or think about medicine here in Brazil. So I used like a volunteering shadowing experience that I had here, and then I transitioned it to a very similar experience, but in the U.S. So I did a very similar activity in Brazil and in the U.S. So I kind of told how like my perspective changed, how I matured, how I grew with that, and yeah, I guess that's how I portrayed it. It was pretty obvious. I feel like my first sentence was already like Brazil, which is good. It shows diversity.
Yeah, I think like the personal statement, and like honestly, like when you're thinking of a holistic application, that's when being an international student can actually be a huge strength, because you are coming in with another like point of view about medicine. Like you've lived maybe what, like 15, 18 years in another country that maybe has done medicine differently, or like you've seen medicine in a different angle. And I think this really brings like a diverse point of view about like the medical field, how hospitals work, what the doctor patient relationship is across different countries. So definitely, like being an international student, if that is something that you think has shaped your relationship to medicine and your relationship to healthcare, you should definitely like include that in your personal statement, and I do believe that it is a strength. Now it doesn't now one thing that I want to point out is it doesn't have to be related to your international experience. Like my personal statement also like had like did like comment on the fact that I was an international student. I did talk about like some of my experiences in Lebanon, and I linked that to a meaningful experience I had here in the US. But it doesn't have to be. So like don't like think that, oh, since you're an international student, your personal statement needs to like justify why you're a good international medical student. If it's not how you feel your personal statement should be, if that's not your story, then don't force it into it, because at the end of the day, the personal statement is really a way to like show them that you know what it's like to be a doctor and that this is what you want to do. So you really want to like first and like foremost, the most important thing is to show your interest and passion for medicine. And if that happens through an international lens, like Kadina explained, and like mine was, then that's a great way to use it. But if it didn't, then don't feel pressure to like use that.
That makes sense. Thank you. And for the next question, it asks, if I have a below average GPA, should I explain this in my essay? Uh,
Um, okay, this is a tough question. I feel like I got some questions in my secondaries, like they put it for everyone. They would say like, if you have something you want to explain, explain here. So they give you the space to do that, and I feel like I would wait until then to explain it. In the primaries, I personally wouldn't waste my personal statement unless it was like something very big or something that you really feel like you must explain. But if your GPA is like is fine, like it's okay, I wouldn't personally. But yeah, in the secondaries, they definitely do ask. There's always like extra space for you to write whatever you want, especially now with COVID. Yeah, we always had like a COVID question in there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think it should be the main focus of your personal statement. Like definitely leave that for um like additional information, and you're definitely gonna have that in secondaries. Now, one scenario where I think like that could be part of your personal statement is if your story is related to like, for example, a struggle that you had to go through in undergrad or like during college, and like this is what also drew you to medicine. And one of the consequences of that was a GPA that had to go down, but it's rationalized by the struggle that you had to go through, but it made you a stronger person and like it confirmed your passion for medicine. Then it can actually like bolster your story. And like it can actually give them a more holistic approach on your application. Like the below average GPA will then be seen through a different lens than if you hadn't included it in the personal statement. So if it is part of your story, definitely included, but it shouldn't be the focus of the essay.
yeah, that's really insightful. Thank you. And for the next question, ask how to organize and link multiple activities together under a coherent theme.
I think yeah, that's a hard one. I It depends how your story has evolved in your life. Like, and there are multiple ways of crafting a personal statement. My personal statement, for example, was really focused on one story. It was like very limited in time and space. Like this was my story. It's like mostly happened in like that experience as a medical interpreter, helping political refugees. And then I made some tangents where I like included some other references to my home country and my other experiences. So it wasn't like I linked multiple experiences together. It was really focused on one of them. But I know that like a lot of personal statements are about your journey towards medicine, and like it does include multiple different activities and experiences that have happened in different times and space and like locations. So I think organizing them and linking them, super important to always make sure that you include the time and place of a particular experience. Like the last thing you want is that your the person reading your personal statement is lost in time and space when they read your personal statement. Like, oh, when did they do that? Oh, were they like at that spot when they did it? Like, you want to make sure that you give them all of the information, even if you included the time and space in the activities. You want to reiterate that. Like, you don't want them to have to go through your activities to understand what the personal statement is. That's important to note. And then how to organize them. I feel like I like wrote multiple activities on like multiple pieces of paper, and then I just like try to link them together. Like, what's a coherent link between A and B? Is there a coherent link between A and B? Do I really want to talk about me in my personal statement, or is a more coherent story to go from A to C? So like list the activities that are part of your story and see how you can coherently link them. And sometimes you don't have to include all of them. Sometimes it can be overwhelming to include like 5 or 6 activities that have happened in like 5 and 6 different years and different places. So limit yourself in the activities, make sure that you give them all of the information and that you have thought like about the link.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Kalina, anything to add on?
Yeah, no, I completely agree about the limiting yourself. I started out my first draft. I was trying to put like all the activities that I was excited about, and that was a disaster. Like it was really hard to link them. And then I kind of did the same thing. I just wrote down the activities, like these are the ones I want to talk about, and then I crossed out the ones that wouldn't. There was just no coherence, or like ones that I could talk about later. So what really helps is knowing that if you have a really good story about one of your activities, but it doesn't link to whatever you have in your personal statement, you can get that story and put it in your activities. Just mark it as a significant
Most
activity and
important.
write it over there, because that's also a very important part of your application. They'll definitely read that essay also. So yeah, if it doesn't connect, just put it there. And I just used a little bit of like, I don't know, like literary stuff to tie mine together. I kind of had like a sentence that repeated like twice or 3 times in the different settings, and that's how like the essay kind of came together. And I had a friend read. She was like a creative writing major. She graduated, and then she helped me like read my essay, and she was the one who kind of like it clicked. She was like, "Oh, you can totally do this," and I guess that's how I tied my activities together.
That's really cool.
Mhm.
And for next question, it asks, what personal traits or qualities did you emphasize in your essays? So I guess it's kind of like tied back
Yeah,
to the competencies recommended by
yeah,
AMC. Yeah,
exactly. Like just look over those competencies. You definitely want to emphasize those. I would say that in my personal statement, I emphasize compassion, which is a big one. I didn't say it directly, like I'm compassionate. No, of course not. But I feel like that's what I was trying to show them with the stories that I was telling. Um, but yeah, definitely don't do it straight. Just like demonstrate that you have it without really telling them.
Yeah, go back to the competencies list. It's really helpful. And like I think that's one of the biggest struggles, at least for me, on like my personal statement. It was how to show, not tell about competencies. Like, how do you show that you're compassionate in a story? How do you show that you're empathetic? And like, you need to brainstorm that. You need to like go back to that experience and actually ask yourself, like, what did you do to show compassion to the person that you were helping, if that's the situation? Because for me, it was also a big theme because I talked about a very hard medical interpretation with a torture survivor that lasted like 6 or 7 hours, where it was like very emotional and intense because there was a lot of trauma involved. And I like asked myself what elements in my interpreting allowed for compassion to be shown. So that's one of them. And then resilience is another important one. I think showing that you're resilient, showing that like you can overcome obstacles by telling a story of an obstacle you've overcome can be really like powerful. And again, here, don't like force all the competencies into that essay because it can show. Like it's okay if your personal statement is mostly about like one story where the main competency that comes across is compassion and empathy. Like that's okay because you're gonna have so many other pieces of writing where you can show other competencies. Like there's a bunch of schools that are gonna ask you like, what's the biggest obstacle you had to overcome, and then that's gonna show resilience, and you can tell another story there. So don't exhaust all of your stories on a personal statement. Don't exhaust all the competencies. You're gonna have plenty of room to show other like parts of yourself. So make sure to limit yourself in like the experiences and what you want to talk about and just do it well. I think for the personal statement for me, it's like less is sometimes much better if it's done well. So focus on like less, maybe less experiences and less competencies, but really like think about how you can show them in a compelling way.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. Thank you for sharing. And here are some other questions also about the essays. So it asks, where did you get help or feedback on your personal statements?
For me, I don't. Probably there's a writing center at UCLA. So there was a writing center at Columbia, and they were doing remote feedback sessions at the time, and like honestly I did like 8 or 9 of them, and it was the absolute like best way to review my essay. Like the I just clicked with the person that was helping me, and like she gave me awesome feedback. She's a creative writing teacher, and she like I think if you have a writing center or like any sort of like writing resource on campus, like definitely utilize that.
Yeah, Emory also had the writing center, but people from the creative writing department are amazing because they're kind of different from the literature people because they're more like open-minded and they just love reading your essays. So I had both the friend that graduated, she read it before we met also a lot of times, and I had a teacher. She was like a poetry teacher that I had, like poetry 101, but she was very helpful in my essay because she also knew me pretty well. So she made sure that the tone that I was talking in was my tone. So yeah, just talk to your professors and people that are good at writing.
Thank you. And the next question asks, did you mention anything about COVID and its impact on you, like maybe in your essays or elsewhere during your application process?
In the secondaries, they asked. They'll probably ask it again this year. And I just plugged in whatever activity I couldn't continue doing because of COVID. Um, and yeah, you'll have the space.
Yeah, I think like I remember last year there was like a lot of confusion about like whether or not there's going to be a COVID essay. Like it was very new. Everything was still up in the air. Like we didn't understand fully how COVID was affecting the application cycle. Um, and like there was a COVID secondary, and for me it was mostly like talking about how COVID impacted me and like my personal life and how like it changed my day to day and added some struggles. And I think it was important to like talk about that. I didn't really talk about the activities that were discontinued because like I had already done most of the activities by the time I was applying. But I think for this cycle, for next cycle, it's gonna be like the COVID question will definitely be there in the secondary. Like I have a feeling about that, and it's a great way to like explain whether or not you had started an experience and like it was cut short, or like give more information about that.
Got it. Thank you. And the next question asks, what kind of volunteering opportunity did you participate in, and did you write about it in your statement? So I guess it's kind of already mentioned in earlier questions, but maybe just a quick recap or, um, yeah, like about volunteer opportunities.
I did just like Ziad, I guess. I did interpreting, translating at a free clinic, and that is the most amazing experience that you can have. If there are any free clinics next to where you guys study, especially for internationals, because there's a lot of international people coming in, usually a lot of immigrants. So that's a great place for you to get both like um, clinical time, yeah, clinical experience, but also, volunteer, translate. And I also worked at the Autism Center in at Emory. We had a program. I would go there every week, teach them, and for volunteering, I guess those are my two big ones. I did talk about them one of them in my personal statement, the other in the activity session. I wrote a meaningful activities essay about it. And also in your secondaries, they're usually going to ask you about your extracurriculars and your volunteering activities. So you'll have a chance to talk about them again from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think so for me the activities it was mostly in the primary, like in the activities list, and then in the secondary if any like activity um fit the prompt, then I would also talk about that. In terms of volunteering, like I've done a lot of the medical interpreting in New York. I've done some in a hospital in France and in Lebanon. Um, I also like really loved working with like immigrant communities in New York. It's like really rewarding to be able to like help communities overcome a language barrier to get access to care, and like you know being a free medical interpreter and volunteering as a medical interpreter, you're like a very very helpful resource. So like if your native language is not English and there is a significant immigrant community in LA, like for example, definitely like consider volunteering. It's very very rewarding. And then I also worked at an HIV free clinic up at Columbia Medical School, and like that was also really like really rewarding to like work with HIV positive patients and like trying to like really understand what it's like to navigate the like medication and like all of the care process with when having HIV like that, and helping them out through the process was also really rewarding. So any like resource, like I know GGSOM has like awesome resources near like in LA, so definitely like look into that, and I'm sure that there's many volunteering opportunities. Like with COVID, I don't know how that works, but I'm sure that like as things are opening up a bit more, you can get involved.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Because we are kind of running out of time, so I guess we have to skip this last question and move on. But like always, feel free to ask a question at the live Q&A sessions. Um, Okay, so this last section in the AMCAS is the standardized test scores. So of course there will be AMCAS scores, and the AMCAS will be automatically released to AMCAS, and most schools require the AMCAS scores that's no more than 3 years old. And depending on like the special programs you might apply to, they like individual medical schools might require some other test scores, and it's always good to check their website for the specific requirements. Um, yeah, that ends our presentation on the AMCAS, and now we will have our live Q&A session. So feel free to use the raise hand function to unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can also type the questions in the chat, and our officers will keep monitoring the chat. Yeah. I guess previously oh, sorry, Risa, I previously I received one question from the chat. Oh yeah, yeah, I think it's you like from the chat. So if you don't mind, you can just unmute yourself and ask the question.
Perfect. Hi, Kalina. I know her. I'm Brazilian. So we have been in communication before, and I'm very happy to hear about you and your experiences as well. I think my question, and I'm a person who like did a lot, so not that I didn't go after opportunities, but I had a lot of opportunities being stopped, and for the fact of that I was an international student and then I got rejected because of it. Like I got to interviews that, and then they stopped me there, like, and they're like, oh yeah, we forgot to update the website saying that you couldn't apply, like stuff like that. Or simple as the fact, like I went to school in the Midwest and they're a little bit more conservatory, so like shadowing opportunities and everything was just like super hard in some sense. Like I had to bike 40 minutes in the snow to get to the hospital. So like how do you put that into your like application, without saying like I don't want to, because believe me, I'm not the person to give excuses, but it's always something that I'm like, okay, how do I put this in?
I would say to, yes, put it in, but then tell them what what you did after that. Like that happened to you, that sucked, that should not happen to any of us. But then from there, like how did you take that? What did you do with that information once you knew that, well, people were stopping me just because I was international? So I went ahead and I don't know, I started my own organization. I was like, let me do this instead, let me try another way. I feel like that shows a lot of your resilience, and it shows that you really want medicine, because it's so much harder for us to find opportunities here sometimes, that if you were trying to work your way around it and really, working hard to find a place where you could shadow or volunteer, then they'll see how much you really want it. And I feel like that will look really good on you. I had a similar experience, and I don't remember where it was exactly, but there's a place where you can, I don't know if it was a secondary or a primary, but there was a place where they asked, I think it was a question on a secondary. It was like, have you ever been through like a tough time or something like that? It was a question, like an essay question, and then I talked about that. It was, oh, have you ever felt a disadvantage compared to others, something like that, and then I used that story. So yes, I would say definitely, write it down, so that you can use it in your secondaries, if not in your primaries.
Thank you.
Yes, Miriam.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, guys, for sharing your knowledge and these valuable information with us. I really appreciate it, and this has been a huge help. I had a question. In your opinion, what do you think was the biggest part of the application process, be it primaries, secondaries, or interviews, that contributed to your acceptance and really provided you the opportunity to shine and stand out and really explain your passions?
Hi, Miriam. Thank you for your question. I think it's always very difficult to pinpoint what makes the cut, like what makes a school want to interview you or what makes a school want to accept you. But like, at least personally, I thought that like my personal statement really like was like it really showcased my passion for medicine in a very personal and compelling way, in my opinion. And like, not all my secondaries were awesome, because when you like are writing secondaries for like 25 schools, it's almost impossible to like write a compelling piece of writing for every single secondary. So like I do admit like that, a lot of them were not super like as good as they could have been, but given the time constraints, it was fine. So my personal statement, like I think definitely played a role. And then the interview, I think once you get to the interview stage, the interview is like extremely important. And it's definitely in my like what makes the cut between an applicant and another, because it just like if I think when you get to the interview stage, like they really love you, they already like really like you as an applicant, and the interview is like gonna try to assess whether um, in an interview setup that is confirmed. So yeah, once you get to the interview stage, I think um, that's what makes the cut. If that's the question, like what element is the one that like is the primary element in like the decision process, or like the one that like boosts your application the most.
Yeah, it's hard to tell because they don't tell you what, like what made them so interested. But I will say that during interviews, the one thing that they would point out was my personal statement. You know, they would, I don't know, compliment them, and that was the only thing that they would compliment. So I think maybe that was it. It's hard to tell. And for schools that were very research heavy, they seemed very interested in my research during the interviews, and maybe that was also something that caught their attention.
And we got a question from the chat asking about the virtual shadowing. So the question says, for those applicants who have not yet started shadowing before COVID and only started virtual shadowing after it happened, is that considered a disadvantage? And I was a hospital sorry, I don't know that word. So working throughout the entirety of COVID, but could not shadow anyone due to the pandemic. So would that, I mean, basically this question is asking like, would that be a disadvantage as an applicant?
I think it's hard to tell because it's the first cycle that all of the admissions committee are dealing with, like most of the applicants having gone through a significant portion of their undergrad during COVID, and that means that like I think like most, if not all, shadowing opportunities in the past year have been like very, very much reduced. And I think like the fact that you were able to work, even if that's not shadowing, is already like something that can work in your advantage. And there are some ways to get involved if you've never shadowed, if you want some like clinical exposure. For example, like I've been working at a COVID-19 vaccine center in New York at Mount Sinai, and I know that vaccine centers always like really need volunteers. So if you are looking for some clinical experience in COVID, I think working at a vaccine center can be an option. And now I know some hospitals may reopen shadowing in limited capacity. Maybe that's an option, and you can, even if you're applying this cycle, you can include that experience and say that you're going to do it over the summer or you're going to do it over the next couple of months. You're allowed to talk about future plans in the activity section. But I don't think that not having shadowing during COVID will put you at a disadvantage. Like they understand that like I honestly, even like if I look at an application where someone has shadowed during all of COVID, I think that's a negative point. Like with like that didn't really agree with public health measures. Like it's completely fine to not have shadowed over. It's even like that's what was advised. Like you did not do anything wrong. I do think that they will be very lenient, and they're gonna adapt the way that they look at an application. Like there's no way that this cycle they can look at like shadowing and clinical experiences the same way that they did 2 cycles ago. It just would not be fair for like all applicants. So I wouldn't stress on it too much, but it's important to always think about how you can get clinical experience even in times like these, because there are ways to get clinical experience. They're hard, they're limited, they're not as maybe niche or ideal, but look for things in your area, and if there's something, definitely like try it out. Like the vaccine centers, like I know a lot of my pre-med friends here who are like doing that because it's one of the only things we can do, and it's very helpful. It's like you're actually doing something for the community that is like, you know, definitely important.
Any other questions?
Hey guys, I want to ask sensitive questions regarding financial situation as an international, um, because, for example, my parents are doctors in Mexico, but of course, doctors in Mexico do not make anything related to like how medicine is in the United States. So honestly, I'm scared of like sounding. You hear doctor and you sound privileged, you know. So I don't know, for example, in the disadvantaged status. I'm kind of like debating how to write the disadvantaged status, because as they were saying about how as an international you're not given like so many opportunities for like research and stuff like that. But I'm like, how do you portray yourself as like, because I'm like, okay, so I'm not I'm like disadvantaged because my parents make money in Mexican pesos, right? But at the same time, it's like I don't want to be like, oh, this is a poor person. Like I don't want this person in my medical school. Like, like I don't know if I'm just crazy thinking about this, but I wanted to see what was your thought process on like, um, yeah. I guess you understood the question, but because I'm like, okay, of course I'm like reaching for a scholarship, but maybe just like, of course, never mentioning that. But I just wanted to see what your approach was to that, and I'm just rambling. Thank you.
I did write a disadvantaged one. I did have the financial background. My mom is a doctor here also in Brazil, but she's a doctor that works with the community. So it's a very, it's not like she's making tons of money like whatever American doctors. But I didn't focus on that in my disadvantage. It was more about how my school here in Brazil had no resources. And so I couldn't really, I didn't have so much exposure to science or anything growing up. So we didn't really have a lab in my school, for example. So I talked about that. I was like, this is the condition that I was in over there. Um, and that poses as a disadvantage, as well as just being international, I guess, not having as much opportunities when I came to the US. You know, some people were closed off. So I talked about that also. You don't necessarily have to like talk about your parents, because yeah, maybe if you do put both my parents are doctors, that it wouldn't, you know, sound right. But you can definitely work your way around it to say like, this is how I lived before, this is the condition that I was in, or tell a story where you felt disadvantaged. That's always a good way to go about it.
And we also got a few questions in the chat. One is asking about like clinical experience. I think we already kind of touch on that. But yeah, the question asks, what type of activities would you suggest being involved in or recommend for clinical experience?
I was just typing the answer. I was gonna say free clinics are really great. They're always needing volunteers, and you get a lot of clinical exposure. I remember the first time I went to my free clinic, they thought that I was a nursing student because I arrived there too early. So they put me together with the nursing group, and I just didn't say anything. So I got to do all, and like the nurses that were with me, they knew it, but not like the higher, like the people who are coordinating it. So I got to do everything that a nurse did. Like I was working directly with the patients on my first day. I did not put that in my application because it's illegal, but it's great clinical experience, free clinics. And the second thing was just messaging doctors who are immigrants or international, because a surprise face, Kevin, who are international, because they usually connect to you more, and then it will be easier for them to make time for you and let you shadow them.
And Ziad, anything to add on?
Completely agree. I think like free clinics are a great way, and it's also like I think a great space to interact with the community, like where you're living. I think that's like one of the great things about medicine is to be able to like really have an invaluable interaction with the community around you, and you definitely get that in a free clinic, which you wouldn't necessarily get to the same extent or like in the same way if you work in like a huge hospital, for example, that like treats patients who are coming from all over the country. But if you're interested in like a very like particular type of specialty, and like again, that is COVID set aside, I think emailing doctors who are like, for example, from your home country, um, can be very, very helpful. Like my shadowing experience, I like was interested in pediatric cardiac surgery, which like there were very few surgeons of that particular specialty in New York City, and then I found a Lebanese doctor that I like reached out to, and then he was willing to talk to me, and then gave me the contact of someone else, and I was able to shadow in the OR. Um, and I think finding like that person with whom you can have a connection can be really, really helpful, because when you're sending out emails, it can be very like frustrating to not receive answers, or to feel like all of these emails are just like never giving you any results. But like if you think about it like strategically and like look for doctors that you can have a connection with, like I think that helps out.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And we have another question asking, is it possible to receive scholarship for only MD programs?
Yeah, I can talk about that to start. Look, so uh, I think the first thing to note is there are two types of scholarship. It's either merit-based scholarship or need-based scholarship. And there are some schools that have one and not the other, and very few schools I think that have both. But I think overall, the schools that give out some type of aid in types of scholarship for international students are limited. At least in my research, it was like maybe about 10 to 12 schools. And the additional obstacle that we have to go through is that a lot of the schools that we can apply to require basically some part of the tuition or all of it to be put in an escrow account before even stepping foot on campus. So that was something that I discovered during my application process after having applied, that like some schools required you to pay 4 years upfront before even stepping foot on campus. So like definitely not all the schools have financial aid. Even the schools that give out financial aid give out less than for undergrad, and less than like for U.S. citizens. So it's definitely like navigating the financial part, like at least for me, was one of the hardest parts of the application. Like I, they just it tends to be harder for medical students as a whole to get scholarships, and for international medical students even more. But there are loans available if like your school gives you a little bit, and then you can get a little bit in loans. Um, that can help out. And I'm like, if there's any particular question about that, like I can put my email. If anyone wants to email me to ask me about any school, like I can answer. Um, but yeah, it's definitely like hard. It's not impossible, but it's one of the hardest thing, at least for me, to navigate in the process.
Yeah,
Thank
the
you so
escrow
much.
account is the worst. I dropped some of my applications after sending in the primaries because they were like, you got to pay this much, which in my currency was like 2.5 million, like straight up. And I was
Yeah,
like,
it's
oh, never
wild.
mind.
And some
So
Yeah.
schools, I
And
mean, I'm
even
just
when they
gonna say it.
say,
Cornell has is debt free for Americans. So if you're a U.S. citizen, it's debt free. But for internationals, it's 4 years of escrow accounts before. So like, it's not fun.
terrible. Yeah.
so
And
oh,
some of them do say they have scholarships, but then it'll be like one person in the entire class of like 120 people. So chances are very low, but they do exist.
so will that escort
My
account
internet's
be
bad.
required like after you get the acceptance, or like before, like you even, so you need that account even before, like for them to kind of like consider your application? So when does that happen, I guess? Yeah.
So everything, all the
Your
financials happen
acceptance is
after.
conditional on it.
Yeah.
Sorry, my internet's really bad. I don't know if I'm lagging.
No worries, no worries.
Yeah, no worries.
The financial stuff happens after, at least in my, like, at no point in the interview process, or like until you get your application, do they like tell you anything about like the escrow account. But if you do get interviewed and then get accepted at a school that requires an escrow account, as Kalina said, it will say in the acceptance letter that your acceptance is conditional upon your ability to provide this escrow account. So, and the escrow can be in loan. So like you can take the loan, but it's very difficult to like take the whole 4 years of tuition in loan. So that's something to keep in mind in when you're crafting your school list. I like thought about it way too late, and I didn't end up withdrawing from these schools. So yeah, that's the escrow account is very like, it's unfortunate, but it is a reality for internationals.
Okay. Oh, there's a question asking if there another like any other schools besides Cornell that require such escort account for
Yes,
4 year
no,
tuition.
yeah, I didn't mean to shame Cornell. It's just that I love the school. It's in New York City, but it does have that. There's many other schools. I don't have the like list in my head right now, but I think that St. Louis University requires an escrow account, and
I think
Pittsburgh
Pittsburgh. Yeah.
Pittsburgh requires 2 years. Some others, I think it's all on their website. I just like hadn't checked before applying.
Yeah.
Yes, Miriam.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, guys, for answering my previous question. Your input was extremely valuable. And to going off of that, in your experience, what do you guys think um, the was the biggest helpful thing you did to prepare you for the interviews? I know interviews are far, far away from where I'm standing right now, but I'm getting really nervous just thinking about them, because I can when I'm nervous, I don't know how to get my point across. So what did you do to prepare the best?
I practice in the mirror. It was embarrassing, but there is a website. If you just put the name of the school and you put interview med school, there's going to be a list of questions from other years, and those are very helpful. Sometimes they'll ask you the exact same question. So I would just write literally all of them down. So like 150 questions, and I would practice in the mirror or call my sister and make her ask me all the questions. And then I would like highlight the ones where I felt I did a bad job and keep doing it. So by the time it's your interview day, you'll have it in the back of your mind. Don't memorize it, but you'll know like exactly which story to use, or exactly how to frame it. And I feel like that was very helpful, knowing, like, thinking about all the stories that you have in your mind and the different ways that you can use them to answer a question, because the same story can be used for your like why medicine, as to like what was your most meaningful experience or something like that. So yeah, just have your stories straight in your head.
And Miriam asked, like, would you mind like providing the link to the website that you said like has all the
Wow, I'm gonna
questions?
look at the name because I do not remember. I'm really
Okay,
bad at
cool.
names.
Thank you. And Ziad, anything to add?
Yeah, so definitely like prepping the question is important. One like caveat there though, don't prep it to a point where it's like feels rehearsed. So like I definitely like did the same of like doing it in the mirror, calling my brother. It really helps just to like talk them out, like because a lot of the experiences are you're gonna like use them on an interview, and like it's important when they ask you a question to like have a story that's ready that like can bolster your answer. So that's definitely helpful. The second, I think, most important thing is reading your application. That's gonna sound very like trivial, and like if you go on YouTube and like see what to do before an interview, a lot of people will do that, but I cannot emphasize how important that is, because like the interviewers have read your application maybe like 2 or 3 times, and everything they're going to ask you is literally in your application, and the last thing you want is to forget something that you wrote in your application, or to like forget a date, or like have dates wrong, or like forget a duty that you talked about. That happens. You're going to have 15 activities, and then that's something that you like submit in May, and then you might have an interview in February, which is like months later. So you want to make sure that like if you have an interview in February or in January, that you read that application a couple of days before, just to make sure that you have everything straight in your head about what you wrote in your application. And then one last thing is, a lot of the interviews are just very conversational. Like honestly, a lot of my interviews were very chill. Like I did not expect the interviews to be this chill and conversational, and like it really was, at the end of the day, just like me and the interviewer having a conversation about like not always my application, like about a topic in medicine that's related to my application, or like sometimes stuff completely like not related. So like if like you like in the tell me about yourself part, sometimes people just have a hobby, and like I said that I like love running, and like if the interviewer loves running, we like bond over that for like a solid 5 minutes. So like these things happen. It's very conversational. Like like try to put your stress level down. I know it's really hard. I struggle with that, but like the first interview will be like a bit stressful. The second one will be a bit easier, and then it just gets easier from there. So the interview process is honestly, for me, was the most enjoyable part of the application. It's just nice to like talk to the people who are reading your application and like see what the other side looks like of that like grueling application process. So try to enjoy it as much as possible as well.
That's very cool. Oh, so speaking of like hobbies, like did you like mention like any hobbies like in elsewhere in your application, like maybe the activities part or like personal statement part, or this just like bring up in the interview only?
I think in the interview, they would always ask, "What's your hobby?" or "What do you do when you're too stressed?" I feel like I got asked that all the time. And there was one secondary question that literally said, like, "List your hobbies." And they didn't want to know about like anything medical school related. They just wanted to know, like, what do you do outside of all of these things that you already told us? And so I would just put, like, I don't know, like I cook, I jump rope, whatever I was doing during quarantine. So, but during interviews, yes, I definitely talk about jumping rope in all of them. I talked about one of them didn't know what a free healthcare was, which was ridiculous. I don't know if he was just like trying to talk to me for a longer time, but we spent like 45 minutes talking about what a free healthcare system is. So yeah, it will be very random. Whatever you make it go, it will go. It flows.
Yeah, I also didn't have any hobbies in other parts of the application. But interviews, yes. Like, and sometimes you have random questions in interviews. Like, I had a student interviewer ask me what my go-to coffee order is. and like that's just not medical. It's just like, it's a way to get to know you, to get the pressure down. So I think in the interviews, like, go with the flow, and if you know your application well enough, like, you'll be fine.
Cool. Any other questions before we wrap up? Oh yeah, Neela.
I have another question, and I think I'm still kind of like stuck between the international, because in my essays I've written immigrant, but I've never really ever written like as an international. And I don't know if that's a good strategy to have, like as an immigrant coming to this country, or like um would I don't know, like do you think it would make a difference in terms of like reviewing, like, oh, this is person's like going to this batch or whatever? I don't know how it works, but how did you guys frame it in like, oh, so as an international or like immigrant, whatever, like what was your strategy to that? Do you think that's gonna make a difference in like, oh, we don't have any more spots for international, like move on, because I'm applying like mid-June, so I'm like kind of like stressed, like how do I do that, thanks. You see me all
No, don't worry. I think like all of these questions I've also had in my mind. So like, don't worry. It's normal because we don't know how they read the application. We don't know how they process it. And like for internationals, it's like even a smaller subset of applicants. So there's nothing on the website that like says how they are, like what kind of international students they're looking for. So I think like if you believe that, like, yeah, if as an immigrant is what describes you more, and like if they ask you about it on the interview, I don't think they will, because like they don't really ask anything about like what you're, I don't know, like that particular like kind of words, like that's not really what they ask. But if you feel like that's what defines you, sure. um I don't think it will make a huge difference, because at the end of the day, like I think that the reason why they process it differently is just like a matter of like, if they I think they do put all international students in like one box, that like that's international students, and like we're gonna take a few of them, and like um yeah, I don't think that like the kind of word you use will change how they look at it. But what do I know? I mean, I was never on the other side. It's just me trying to speculate how they read these applications. So unless you like have an immigrant visa, or like sometimes you can qualify for like some like grants for some types of immigrant visas. But like I was on an F1, I was fully an international student, came in when I was 18. So yeah.
Yeah, same with me, but they never ask you directly like anything about being international. Like they won't go into that. But one thing that I did got get asked was about if I plan on staying in the US after I finish medical school, which I honestly wasn't expecting that, but I got asked about it twice. In one school, they were very happy with my answer that I wanted to be in the US. And the other school, um, that school was like, oh, but you don't want to go back and like spread your knowledge. And I was like, sure, but I want to live in the US, you know? So they're really interested in having me like go back and fix the issues in my country. So I guess just research the school before. And maybe find out if that's what they're interested in, because it was kind of a tricky question because I had a clear answer, but maybe to them it wasn't exactly what they expected. But they'll never ask you about like your visa status or anything like that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that's super illegal, but who knows. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much for sharing. I think as we're kind of approaching to 6:30, yeah, we have to kind of wrap this up. So we want to express our great thanks to our collaborator F1 Doctors. Here's their website. They have offered us a lot of help for our past event and also this event. And for our attendees, please fill out our feedback form to help us improve on our future programming. And also we've launched a Slack channel, and you're most welcome to joining to network with other pre-med undergrads or medical students to share resource or just chat. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for attending our event, and thank you so much, Kalina and Ziad, for all the great helpful advice and for sharing your experience. It's super, super helpful. Thank you so much. So if there's no other questions, I think we will just end here. Thank you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Feel free to
Bye
email me.
bye.
I just added it, Ziad also in the
Oh,
chat.
me
Okay,
too.
cool.
So
Email
Yeah.
me,
any
or we're
questions?
both, I think, on the F1 Doctors platform, so that's also a way to
Yeah.